one of my daughters. So let me just see, where am I now? Okay. All righty. So we're going to get started tonight. And the way the theme is going to be tonight, woman's true desire. Now, normally this particular class, my husband and I would travel and we would do it, and it would be like 3 or more classes. So today I'm going to be just starting with a few openings that I'm hoping that is going to lead us to a fuller understanding. So again, woman's true desire, what is it? And it's based upon a particular book we've studied, and I'm sure some of you might have that book. It kind of looks like this, Woman's True Desire, okay? And it's a book that has helped my husband and I when we were married. Right now, I was married to my husband for 44 years before he passed in 2016 from ALS. And so it has been an encouragement from Sarah Jane to help me to get back out there and to start doing these classes for the young people today. And so I'm privileged to be in your presence today. You are princesses, as my husband would call you. All righty, so let's go on. All right. Today, we live in a time when our women are not fulfilled. I'm going to have to move over the visual because it's in the way of some of the words that I'm trying to read. Okay. Okay, I didn't move it, but hopefully I can remember it. Today, we live in a time when women are not fulfilled, they're not happy, they're sad, angry, or have no direction. I'm sure that is a part of most of our lives, if not all of our lives. We may think we're happy, we may think we're fulfilled, but what direction do we have? Well, there's an old saying in the medical missionary field. It says, ascertain the cause, remove it, then assist the body that the body can heal itself. And we are going to use that same remedy when we talk about woman's true desire. So tonight, we are going to deal with the number 1, ascertain the cause. Because if you don't understand the cause of something, then you cannot deal with the healing of it. And so it's important that we learn, what is it? Why are women not happy? Why are we not sad? Why are we so sad? So Sarah, if you can help me out, I need to pull the video away from, you see, there we go. Oh, I thought it was. Away from the screen. Okay, you can see the screen good, right? Okay, yeah. I'm not seeing it all. Okay, anyway, you see, here is another old saying. If you don't know where you came from, then you don't know where you are, then that means you don't know where you are going. You see, as women, we need to understand what was God's plan for us. What is a woman's true need? And if we don't understand that, then we may choose the wrong things in life. For instance, if a gentleman came up to you and he had money and he can give you all that you want, and you said, well, he is the best thing happening, and you fall in love with him, but then you get married and you find out, I don't feel fulfilled. You know, there was an abbreviation that we used to use. It's called BMW. A lot of us have a BMW. It's called Black Man Working. And we feel like if we get a good Black man, he's working. And my husband was one of those men. He was a very good, perfectly good provider. And before we understood all of this, before we found the Lord, before we knew about health and anything like that, we had our issues during our early part of our marriage. But then when we found the Lord and we learned more and more about God's love, it was a great blessing into our marriage. And then the icing on the cake was when we learned and studied from the book Woman's True Desire. So tonight we're going to start from the very beginning, because if we don't know where we came from, then we don't know where we are. And then that means we don't know where we're going. So it wasn't so in the beginning. What was God's intent for women? Now, I know as we go through this, it doesn't mean that all women may get married, but still, what was the characteristics? What was the thing that was going to please and make, cause women to be content and happy in life? So in the beginning, God himself gave Adam a companion. And I'm still having a problem with this screen over here. Okay. Okay, I'm still, all right. I am having an issue with this screen here.
Sister Dawson, are you able to view your slide?
I can view it, but I have the
There's a black
individuals.
bar blocking you.
Yes.
Okay, what I
There-
would recommend is where you see view on your top right-hand corner.
Okay, I'm going to escape here where
Yep.
I see view. Okay. And what do I do with that?
You know what I'll say is just whatever you see, like hold on to the, like click on the faces and see if you can drag it to your farthest
Yeah,
right out of your way.
yeah, I tried that. Let's see if it does now. Okay. All right, I think, yeah, it's gone now. It's to the, it's at the bottom. Thank you. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Okay, that was kind of disturbing for me because I couldn't read what I had on the screen. Okay, so as I said, we need to ascertain the cause, and the cause may be we don't know who we are. And so if we go back to the very beginning, that's when we can find out what was God's intent for women. So in the beginning, God himself gave Adam a companion. He provided an helpmeet for him, a helper corresponding to him, one who was fitted to be his companion and who could be one with him in love and sympathy. Eve was created from a rib taken from the side of Adam, signifying that she was not to control him as the head, nor be trampled under his feet as an inferior, but to stand by his side as an equal, to be loved and protected by him. And I want you to focus on those two words, loved and protected, because those are very important. And this was to come from the man. The man was to love and protect the woman. Now, we're not just talking about the wife, we're also talking about fathers protecting their daughters, men protecting women if they see an abuse situation. And so that was their role, was to protect a woman from these very things. So a part of man, bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh, she was his second self, showing the close union and the affectionate attachment that should exist in this relation. For no man ever hateth his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one. And that's talking about the marriage relation mainly, but it's still helping us. I want you to focus on the fact, the role that God put for women and for men. Men were to love and protect. So we also find information in Proverbs 31. The Proverbs 31 woman is not a prisoner. The Christian mother's sphere of usefulness should not be narrowed by her domestic life. The solitary influence which she exerts in the home circle, she may and will make felt in more widespread usefulness in her neighborhood and in the church. Home is not a prison to the devoted wife and mother. So I want you to understand the characteristics and the traits that God has given to women were not just for her home and her family. She had the ability to help other women, take care of many things outside of the home if she had the characteristics that God has granted her to have in the very beginning. Okay, and so her influence would spread through her neighborhood and in her church, and not just for to be a slave at home, only taking care of her children and her husband. But what happens when there's no law? There's no protection. Remember, I mentioned women were to be protected. Now, in the book, Woman's True Desire, page 28 and 3 to 29, this is what it says. Women are to be protected if they are to survive. Every traditional society has recognized this and enshrined that protection in law as a woman's right and a man's duty. But no king, no law, no protection, neither for individuals nor for society as a whole. And of course, the first to suffer individually and collectively are always the women. And if you think about what's going on in this world today, women suffer the most from not being protected by the men in society. Little girls suffer the most when they don't have daddies to take care of them. Wives suffer when their husbands don't stand up and protect them. And so we need to understand no law, no protection. And it continues. This didn't just start lately. Man the protector becomes man the abuser. These are some of the things, as we list of things that women have gone through throughout the ages. 1, polygamy. 2, women forced to marry against their will. 3, in early Roman society, woman was deemed property of man and subject to his control. Under the common law in England, a man could beat his wife to maintain family discipline. Misogyny, men who are prejudiced against women. Then you have rape, molestation, incest. And then you have in medieval times, horrific tortures to her body if caught or thought to have committed adultery. They had machines they call breast rippers, the Spanish donkey, the female circumcision, scold's bridle, chastity belt, sawed in half. The picture that I have here on this particular page is the Spanish donkey. This, as you can see, had spikes on it. It looked at the top, if you can see all those spikes. A woman, if the man thought she was committed adultery, this is one of the tortures. If you can see the spikes, she would have to straddle that and move her around on that. It would actually rip her inner organs, her female organs. That was a punishment. And they had other ones, the breast ripper and female circumcision. And there's many more, okay? So I want you to just know that this is the beginning of the anguish and the pain that women went through many years ago. So it started many years ago. So the abuse continues even today. It also stated that the FBI estimated that one woman in the United States is beaten every 18 seconds. It is estimated that between 2,000 and 4,000 women will die each year from abuse. And that's where it comes from, domestic abuse, Jackie Davis, page 4. Well, women got tired of it. Now they started fighting. So now you have women's suffrage movement. The women's suffrage movement actually began in 1848 when a women's rights convention was held in Seneca Falls, New York. The Seneca Falls meeting was not the first in support of women's rights, but suffragists later viewed it as the meeting that launched the suffrage movement. For the next 50 years, women's suffrage supporters worked to educate the public about the validity of women's suffrage. Under the leadership of Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and other women's rights pioneers, suffragists circulated petitions and lobbied Congress to pass a constitutional amendment to enfranchise women. And again, it tells you where that comes from. So as you can see, with all the suffering that came, women not being able to vote, women being men's property, the abuse and of all these things that would happen, and women began to fight. So what is the women's suffrage movement? Meanwhile, many American women are beginning to chafe against what historians have called the cult of true womanhood. That is the idea that only true women was a pious, submissive wife and a mother concerned exclusively with home and family. put together, all of these contributed to a new way of thinking about what it meant to be a woman and a citizen of the United States. So I want you to take and think about everything that I'm sharing with you and see and go back in history and see where the problem has started. So keep that in mind as we build upon this. So then the women's liberation and feminist movement happened in about 1960s to the 1980s. And as you can see the sign that the woman's holding, judge women as people, not as wives. So if you look at that statement, they're separating the fact that women and wives. In other words, we're people, we're not wives. But what does that mean? That they're putting a bad connotation upon what a wife is because of the way it has been, the way they have been entitled them way back then. Okay, so then now we have the women's liberation and the feminist movement. This is video I have here, Women Who Make the World Worse. And I'm hoping it plays properly for you, but this is more of a modern day series, because what happens is that when you have had all of this growing up through history, a lot of these things are still a part of the thinking of men and women. And so because of that, a lot of reasons or ways are put together to try to help solve the situation. But if we don't understand what God intended from the beginning, we will grab hold of some of these things. Some of us might have been influenced by some of these things by going to the schools, the colleges especially, where a lot of these women's liberation movement stuff has been pushed. So let's see what happened in this particular video. You know the person probably that's giving the video, but he's interviewing a woman who wrote this book, Women Who Make the World Worse. So let's see what happens.
Well, for decades, the feminist movement has tried to erase the differences between the sexes, between men and women. And now a leading female author says those efforts have damaged American society.
Okay, so now what are we coming up with? These women are trying to damage women in what way? Let's go back a little bit and get that. I don't want you to miss that part.
Well, for decades, the feminist movement has tried to erase the differences between the sexes.
So they're trying to erase the differences between the sexes.
Men and women. And now a leading female author says those efforts have damaged American society.
Whether they're claiming gender discrimination in classrooms, downplaying the importance of men and fathers, criticizing women who choose to stay home and raise their kids, or calling marriage an oppressive institution, Cato Byrne says feminists for decades have gotten it wrong. In her new book, Women Who Make the World Worse, the Washington editor of National Review magazine and former panelist on CNN's The Capitol Gang says the feminist movement has done more harm than good. And she says their vigorous assault is ruining our schools, damaging families, and instigating an all-out war between the sexes.
So as you can see from this, because of their fight and what they're fighting for, a lot of this information has passed through the thinking pattern of how people view women, how women view themselves and what they're fighting for. So women are fighting and they're angry. And sometimes you may say, well, I'm not angry, but you're angry when you're not satisfied. You're angry when you don't even know what it is, why men do not satisfy you in a way of taking care of your emotional needs. Not so much, we have narrowed life down to just sex. And a woman is not about that, okay? But we'll talk about that more in a future lecture. But right now I want you to see what damage has come about due to the fact of women's liberation.
Well, with us from our Washington studio is the author of Women Who Make the World Worse, Cato Byrne. And Kate, it's a pleasure to have you back with us in the 700 Club. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Reverend Robinson. Pleased to be with you.
Listen, what's the deal? I thought that with the passing of Betty Friedan and Bella Abzug that the feminist movement was in decline. Is that not the case?
You have an awful lot of company. The reason I wrote this book is because far too many people think feminism died with the Equal Rights Amendment. It seems so 1970s to talk about feminism. The point of this book is to explain to my readers that the most dangerous, destructive premises of the modern women's movement are very much alive and have enormous influence in our schools and universities, in our culture, in our politics. The goals, the consensus goals of equal rights, the matters of simple justice, those goals were achieved long ago. But these women persist in weakening the family, imposing quotas on college sports, peddling the notion to our daughters that marriage is an oppressive institution. I name names and I quote the women who hold these views. They're not household names, but they're enormously influential nonetheless.
Well, you named a few that were household names, such as the sitting Supreme Court.
Oh, no, I can't believe I did that. I was trying to get rid of the X's that were on there. I'm sorry.
Well, as you well remember, before she was elevated to the Court of Appeals and then the Supreme Court,
What is her misconception?
nonetheless.
Well, you named a few that were household names, such as the sitting Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. What is her misconception?
Well, as you well remember, before she was elevated to the Court of Appeals and then the Supreme Court, she was a leading feminist legal theorist. I remind people in the book, she's one of those, like the other woman I cite in this book, who refuse to recognize that there are any innate differences between men and women. So when people like Justice Ginsburg see demonstrable differences in attitudes or aptitudes or abilities, she attributes it to discrimination. These women cannot allow that in 2006, American women enjoy full equal rights and virtually unlimited opportunity because they're grievance feminists. They have to always hype the notion that American women face widespread discrimination. And as long as they deny innate differences between the sexes, they're going to find those differences.
Well, you pointed out something. Cemetery, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that there are then, would you say, Kate, two different groups in feminism? I mean, wouldn't you agree that maybe something good came out of modern feminism or the beginnings of it? For example, greater career opportunities, higher salaries. Now you're talking about a group that's a little more in-depth and intense than that.
I never had any quarrel, as most women didn't 30 years ago, with the matters of simple justice. Of course, women shouldn't face discrimination. Discrimination in employment and education have been outlawed at the federal level for over 30 years. I always parted ways with the modern women's movement because I never believed that marriage and family life were a patriarchal plot. I never believed that there were no differences between men and women, that they were interchangeable. And I never believed that women's equality rested on the unrestricted right to abortion for 9 months. That is the agenda, though, that the modern women's movement, under the false flag of equal rights, continues to pursue. And I show the kind of damage it's done to our institutions.
Kate, you said, and I want to quote, the modern woman's movement is totalitarian in its methods, radical in its aims, and dishonest in its advocacy. Do you want to expand on that?
Absolutely. Of course they are. They impose a strict monolithic test on other women. I, of course, for having written this book, am considered an enemy of my sex, a weak-minded tool of the patriarchy, because of the monolith that they enforce. Their advocacy, which I take apart chapter by chapter, and in doing so, cite the other women who fight the modern feminists, who expose their phony research, who expose their lies. They intimidate lawmakers with the kind of advocacy research they do. Many people are surprised to find how much federal money subsidizes the agenda of the radical agenda of the modern women's movement. And so I lay it out in chapter by chapter, the effect on family, on marriage, on sports, on the military, and on politicians who are intimidated by the feminists today.
Kate, talk a little bit about these deeply rooted feminists and their position on marriage. They see it as an oppressive institution. Where did that concept come from for them?
We've been warned for well over 30 years. One of the founders of Ms. Magazine, which remains the flagship publication of the modern women's movement, said back then, you cannot destroy inequality between men and women until you destroy marriage. And I quote the influential feminists who continue to hold those views. the kind of agenda they're pushing in our universities and our young people. They believe that the emotional bonds of marriage are the enemy of women's equality. They feel the same way about the emotional bonds between parent and child. They believe fathers are unnecessary. They see the traditional role of father and mother as crippling stereotypes. I explained who they are, what they're up to, and the kind of federal money that they receive.
Last question, you mentioned about Hillary Clinton in her book, It Takes a Village to Raise a Child. She is a leading candidate for President of the United States. What would a Clinton presidency bring us in regard to the issues that you're discussing?
Well, Hillary Clinton has a long record of endorsing all the central aims of the modern women's movement. She endorses the phony notion that American women face a discriminatory wage gap. She, of course, backs, and she and her husband pushed very heavily during the 90s, a big federal child care scheme, which in no way responds to the needs of young families with small children, given the choices they're freely making with respect to sacrificing income in order to have a mother home with children. She endorses hyping the evidence of domestic violence in an assault against men and marriage. She, of course, endorses, despite her new rhetoric, the unrestricted right to abortion for 9 months. She would be a reliable ally of the modern women's movement.
Okay, thank you for being with us. Kate O'Byrne, ladies and gentlemen, the book, Women Who Make the World Worse.
Enormously influential nonetheless.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the video right there and let's go to the next one. Well, let's look at the results of women's liberation and feminist movements. This also comes from Women's to Desire, page 33, paragraph 1. The goal was equality between the sexes, but the option presented was companionship between the sexes. And what we ended up with was antagonism between the sexes. Then there were phases of the movement. Women's to Desire is now on the brink of suicide, assaulted by the insecurity that plagues the emotional lives of women who claim that they do not need to be protected and therefore must deny their need to be loved. And that comes on page 31. And so these are the phases. The first wave of feminism is we want to be equal to men. The second wave of feminism was we don't need men. And the third wave of feminism is we are men. So you can see how some of these thinking, how some of these thoughts have entered into our children, into ourselves. And sometimes you don't even see it happening, but it comes through advertisements, society, and thinking things have been said, even in the church. So today, such women have to make it on their own. They speak loud and long about equality. They demand equality. They impose equality. They make it look as though we might have finally have emerged from the dark ages. And I know we're skipping a lot from the book. I am just giving you highlights. I pray that if you have the book, that you will read these sections more thoroughly. Okay, so we'll do questions in a few. So now let's look again at the two weapons. Two weapons have been used to abolish the traditional roles of men and women in our society. One is a disdain for motherhood, and that's what Kate O'Brien was mentioning. The more people talk about equality, the less value raising children seems to have. In fact, women's role as mother and nurturer is seen as something to be ashamed of, forcing women to renounce it or practice it clandestinely. The other weapon is scorn for man's exclusive role as initiator in love, and thus the person responsible from beginning to end. And it really brings that out in the book, Women's to Desire, how men are supposed to be responsible from beginning to end when it comes to the relationship between the man and the woman. So, Women's to Desire, what does she really want more than anything else? The need to be loved is etched into a woman's innermost being. The next phase of this class will be entitled, and we can't cover everything today, but if I come back, it's going to be called Women's to Desire. This class my husband and I used to give was at the minimum 3 classes, and it was based on the book Women's to Desire by Danielle. And so we're going to finish off, I'm going to finish off here with the lecture, and we are going to start taking some questions, and I hope I'm able to answer them for you. So I'm going to come out of here and we're going to do some talk, okay? All right, Sarah.
All right. Thank you so much, Sister Dawson. I know that there's no way for you to have covered everything you want to cover in such a short amount of time, but that was very insightful, kind of just taking us through the history of how we got to where we are right now. And we do have time for some questions. I did see a hand raised. Vanessa, did you have a question? We're going to start. If you guys have any questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can type it in. You could type it in the chat box as well. So, Vanessa, do you have a question?
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you so much, Sister Dawson. You know, just hearing all this is it's insightful, and it's something that I didn't really hear of, you know, growing up, especially in school or, you know, talked about within my community. But I guess the question I have for you is, how did you come across this, and how does it relate to your own story and your journey?
Okay, you're asking me, how did I come across the book, the information, or what is your question?
This book and this information and how it, you know, changed your life.
Okay. Like I said, I was married to my husband for 44 years before he passed. And in the beginning, I married young. I married at 17. And my husband and I were determined that we would not get divorced or separate and raise our children. But as I came into the Lord around 17, about maybe 17 and a half or so, I found the Lord. And as I started studying about God and what he wanted in our marriage, and we both became Christians. And we were Christians before, but we didn't have a lot of understanding of a lot of things. And so when we started studying, it changed our lives completely. I think it started when we wanted to teach our children at home, and we realized we needed a more country environment to do that in. And so God led us step by step. First of all, he led us into the country where we can learn how to be more self-sustained. And then as we began to do the medical missionary work of taking care of people if their physical needs, we realized that their spiritual and their emotional needs, if not met, it would interfere with their healing process. And so this book was presented to us, and we started delving into it and reading some of the things. And there were times in my marriage, I would say things like this to my husband. I would say, "You don't love me." And he would look at me and says, "What's wrong with you? You're crazy. What do you mean I don't love you? Like, everything I do is to show you I love you." And then I looked at him and I said, "You know what? I know you love me, but I don't feel it." And he didn't know what to do with that, because as a Black man, they're taught, be a good provider and you'll have accomplished everything you needed for that family if you just provide. And my husband was a good provider. I can go into a store, and if I looked at something, he says, "You want that?" And I would say, "No, I don't need that." But he was always trying to give me, give me, give me. And God showed me back then, because I was in the beginning of studying with the Lord, and he would talk to my mind, give me impressions. And he said, "You know what? Your husband is loving you the way he knows how to." So that kept me for many years to understand that he was sharing and showing his love to me by giving to me. And so then when we got hold of the book and we started studying it, and I looked at a section, and my husband, and there's a section in there that let me see if I can find the page in here. And we were reading it because we started reading this book on our way traveling down to Florida. We had a program to do down there. And it was talking about the need to be loved is etched into a woman's innermost being. And it begins to give a definition of the things that her life will show when she is unhappy. And when we read that, my husband says, I said to him, I said, "That's it." And he says, "That's it? You didn't feel loved? You didn't feel protected?" You know, and so we then begin to delve in more and more and study and read it and talk about it. I've been to that book so many times, given classes that we used to give here at our facility for husband and wives. And even when you go through the book, when we were going through the book, there were times it made me almost angry because I would say, you're not being the man that you're supposed to be. I started blaming him. And I said, Lord, this is not right, because a lot of men don't like women to read this book because they think it's a male bashing book. And in reality, it's not a male bashing book. It's a book that helps us as women to know what our true desire is, because, we can want something and think that's what we need, and we get it and we're still not happy. And the need will go on and on and on. And each time we'll then begin to want something else, something more. See, women, we are emotional. A man can take his emotions and box them up and put them on a shelf. Women are like a river. Everything that we've experienced, everything that we're going through, all flows into this river. And so when a man has to deal with us, and we say something like, "You don't love me," or whatever negative thing we say, they don't understand that, and neither do we. And that's where this book try to help us to understand, what are we really trying to say? Women say things, but they don't always understand what it is they're really trying to say. And so, yes, this book has been a blessing to us in our marriage, and we have tried to help many, many people. We've done personal classes, and we did lecture classes with groups. I hope that answers your question.
It definitely did. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, I see some other questions, but before we go into the next question, I want to ask you, just for, anyone who hasn't read the book or who doesn't have it, if you could just say, in just like a few sentences, the book is called Woman's True Desire, but like you said, a lot of times we don't even know what we want or what we think or how we're feeling. So what is, if you could share in a few words, what is a woman's true desire?
Okay, one of the things of the area that I try to focus on, it's in that very first chapter, and the question was asked, like you're asking, what is it? And the main things that I like to focus on is the three things: that to be loved, because it asks the question on page 22, woman's true desire, what does she really want more than anything else? What is her ultimate will, her most basic need? Is it to have children, to be rich or successful, to be beautiful and young? Or is it to be loved, to feel loved, and to know that she's loved? And that's the question that's being asked. And so, of course, I don't know what you would answer, but the answer would be the last one: to be loved, to feel loved, and to know that she's loved. And so that's three particular needs of a woman in order to know that she's loved. And so, like I said, when my husband was a good provider, I didn't feel loved. But why? Because to be loved is to be chosen always. And what that means is that you have become his priority. And men are afraid to make you a priority over their work or whatever, because you may be having an emotional day and you really want him to stay there, and he has to get to work. But what they need to understand is that sometimes, and I look at myself, if I was having a bad day or a bad morning and he was about to leave and I cried and he came to me and said, "Oh, honey, I'll stay with you," I'll be like, wow, okay, you can go now. I'm happy. So you only need a little bit. You don't need them to stay there all day holding your hand or whatever. You just want to know that he makes you his priority. And that's all we desire as women. We don't need to have. Now, clingy women are women who are not being fulfilled. Clingy children are children that are not being fulfilled. And they cling and they cling and they cling. So the first one is to be loved. And the second one is to feel loved. We want to feel and be that we're emotionally connected, okay, to the one. You're not just a piece of furniture. You want to know that he laughs when you laugh, cries when you cry. He's connected to you in many ways. And the other ones is to know that you're loved. As women, and I had to deal with this, as we get older, the hair grows gray, the wrinkles come, the teeth, you lose some teeth, your eyes get dim and you need these glasses. And you want to know when your life changes, and even after you have children, you have stretch marks, and then you have the little belly that hangs over a little bit if you didn't get it all tucked in afterwards. And you want to know that that man is going to love you no matter what, unconditionally. And so that's important for a woman to know. And so when we're dealing with our need, we need, first of all, understand what it is. And so to be loved, to feel loved, and to know that she's loved is one of the most important that I feel of the information I've gotten from this book.
And that was powerful. Thank you. To be loved, to feel loved, and to know that she's loved. And I like how you broke down how each one is slightly different. It's not all the same thing. So I love that.
Right. So we can be receiving part of that and still not feel loved. And you don't want, and I couldn't understand. It's like, in my mind, it was like, I got a BMW. Why am I so unhappy?
So the key is to be able to receive all of it, just like we're, as human beings, we're mental, physical, we have mental, physical, and spiritual as well. It's the same thing as a woman, to be loved, to feel loved, and to know that she's loved. That's beautiful. There was another question. So I see some questions, and then I also see a hand up. So this next question is, so before sin, what did women need to be protected from?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first.
So before sin, so before there was any sin, before, Eve went down the path and ate the fruit, what did she really need her husband to protect her from? Like, if there was no sin, would there still be that dynamic?
Okay, that's another study, but I want to just throw something out there for you to bring up. When Eve left Adam's side, he wasn't there for her, to help her. You see, sometimes we just need that protector, someone there to say, we know better, because God said such and such. And so when Eve wandered away from Adam, she did not have the protection to help her keep her focused on what God had said. He was to be like the priest of the home, the one to lead her and guide her and keep her in focus with God. And that's how sin started.
Okay, yeah. And we're gonna move over. So there's some questions in the chat, but I'll kind of do a mix of hands and the questions as well. So Sharetta, do you have a question?
I do. Hi. Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
So this is interesting because this topic has been coming up to me a lot over like the last 2 weeks. And I really think maybe God is trying to show me something, or he's trying to have me, do a deeper study on this. So the timing of this is very interesting. So just a context before I ask my question. So I'm a stay-at-home mom. I resigned from my job and